Okay, greetings, good evening to the folks listening in from the UK and for everywhere else on planet Earth. Thank you for joining in. If you do miss the slide, you can always come back and listen and share the link with your friends. And thanks to Corded Cloud, who has got all of these folks, including myself, together. And the topic we are going to talk about today is cyber security and employee productivity. They're often dare I say, some people call them different sides of the magnet or night and day, and they can't meet. But my personal belief, I'm a practicing CISO, you can still keep employees productive, but you can also keep them secure. A couple of hygiene issues before we begin. Number one, please do ask any questions if you want to ask your questions. You can also there should be a download section where you can download collateral, and even if you keep coming back, because the Bright Talk allows us to add attachments after the webinar is over. So keep that in mind. The recording will be available after the webinar. So let's go straight in. Can you be productive and be secure? Security is often seen as I wouldn't say disabler, but a pain in where, right? And people have to go through hurdles to get something done. They have to fill in hundreds of forms to get an application approved, all of that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go through all the pain points of security. However, I believe that actually you can be productive in the pandemic situation we are in. You can still be productive. You can let your employees and your staff do what they want within limit, obviously, but still keep them secure. Still offer that visibility, the dashboard of what is happening in your network. Still make sure that they are able to only access, only access what they should be able to access. And adaptive authentication is absolutely critical because it makes it transparent, but it also keeps the organization secure. So we're going to discuss a lot of these things right now. And let's go straight in. Before we do that, each of these panelists, including myself, will take roughly a minute to explain who they are and why they're the best people for today's session. Ron Rezin, if we talk with you first, sir. A brief introduction of who you are and what you've done.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. So my name is Ron, and I've spent a lot of time training in the Israeli Defense Force, and in Unit 8200. That's like my basic cybersecurity background. And then I had various product management roles. My last role was in an industrial cybersecurity company called Clarity, if you've heard of them. And for the last 2.5 years, I've been the VP Product Management at Silverfort, which I'll tell you more about later.
Okay. Thank you. Jonathan, over to you, sir.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so I started out as an IT administrator for a small manufacturing company. So I've been in the front line, like many of you listening, but I left that role to pursue a career in IT sales, and I've worked for various different firewall vendors over the years. Most recently, I've been at Sophos for around about 8 years now. I joined Sophos as a result of acquisition. I was running the UK and Ireland channel for a firewall vendor which Sophos acquired. Since then, I've developed a bit more of a passion for technology, and I've graduated to be more of a sales engineer. But I have a lot of experience in not just a firewall product, but of course the sort of the broader range of products that Sophos do, including endpoint and mobile protection. And yeah, have a sort of broad exposure to IT security, cybersecurity through all of those roles.
Okay, thank you. My name is Amar, and many of you may know me already. And as you can see from the blue turban, that's the only color turban I wear. I'm a practicing CISO, and I'm not gonna grill these folks, but I'm gonna take these folks and ask them questions. And they know their products, but they also know the technology, and they know the pain points as much as I do. But they also see the different requirements that their customers are seeing, and they also see how their customers are actually solving those problems with their particular solution. So it's very important. We're going to stick with the topic. So Ron, I guess if you don't mind, I'll start with you first. Can I keep my staff, which are now predominantly working from home, and many of them may never have worked from home before. It was a privilege, and now it's the norm. Can I keep them productive, and instead of introducing hundreds of onerous processes, can I keep them productive, but can I keep them secure? And how using or how does Silverfort actually help me do that? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Amar. So actually, I think that's an excellent question. First of all, to the question, can I keep them productive? Well, I really think companies don't have a choice. Companies that aren't able to effectively have a remote workforce these days, the chances are that they'll have a very hard time to stay in business, even as we see things in certain regions of the world slowly getting back to a certain norm. It's a very different norm. So the answer, first of all, is you really have no choice. You have to keep your employees productive remotely. Now, I think specifically with remote employees, the security challenge is only greater, right? So if you used to have a certain amount of remote employees that were very specific employees, some of them, you had some kind of setup for them to work from home, if it's using a VPN or if it's using some kind of VDI infrastructure, etc. And now suddenly it needs to be all of your employees. And that effectively creates a huge attack surface that wasn't there before. And now that we accepted that, we must take this step and allow that type of productivity, we need to rethink how we validate or how we protect ourselves against these new attacks. And obviously, we've been talking to a lot of customers saying that we see our employees disabling their always-on VPN in all kinds of ways, because again, their kid needs to log on to a remote school e-learning sessions, or their kids wants to watch Netflix and it doesn't work through their company's VPN. So that's the reality that companies are living. Again, it's a hard reality, but that's the reality. The question is how you cope with these new risks. And we really believe, and this was our approach, obviously, also for securing networks before the pandemic and work from home, but especially when working from home, you really need to understand exactly what the user is doing within your network. So he's connected via VPN or via VDI or any kind of infrastructure that allows him the basic connectivity to his productivity applications, to his business applications, to development applications. But then the question is, how do you validate that he is who he says he is in each step of the way? So if malware in some way has gotten to his computer and he finishes authenticating into the first entrance to the network through the VPN, how do you make sure that all the actions he's performing are actually his? And we believe that, again, there is no silver bullet here. You need to, there's a lot of security products that help towards that, but it's critical to look at the authentication as a new perimeter, we believe, or identity as a new perimeter, and really detect different authentication attempts of that user throughout the network. And whenever that is suspicious, again, that's a capability that Silverfort has, really enforce step-up authentication or some kind of additional verification that the user is who he says he is.
Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. Sorry, go on. Are you done, or sorry?
I can go on for a long time. But
no, that's fine. I'll give both of you equal chance. For now, that's really good. I have a lot of questions already, but let me, if you don't mind, Ron, I'll go to Jonathan.
Sure.
Jonathan, so looking at it from your visibility, okay? Now I know you have a good, very great looking and useful desktop. I know all of the products that I'm talking about here. As a CISO, as IT, regardless, as one of these people who needs that visibility now, not just in the office, but now globally, right? Remotely. How does Sophos now offer this? What value add is that? How do I keep my users secure with this dashboard approach, the endpoint security on the laptop, but also this dashboard view, because I think that's really critical. What Ron is saying is absolutely critical, but then equally complementary is this visibility that the in very good dashboard that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, organizations of all different sizes have already started to gravitate towards people working remotely, even before the current situation. And obviously, what's happened has forced everybody's hand to really look at enabling remote working. But it was becoming increasingly normal anyway. And of course, one of the biggest challenges, well, there's two challenges, but certainly one of the biggest challenges around any kind of remote working operation is you're not necessarily connecting directly to those desktops anymore. And what this causes from a security perspective as potentially a problem is you can't have a management console that relies on being in the same network as your devices. Because you're not going to be able to guarantee that those devices are going to be in the same network. You may have multiple different office locations, and of course, as soon as you pick up your laptop and you take it home, or you take it to a customer location, or you work from the local coffee shop, then if you're relying on direct connectivity, then that device is it's on its own. You can't guarantee the security of it. You can't administer it. You can't change any settings. And this is exactly why at Sophos we created many years ago Sophos Central. Sophos Central is basically a cloud-based antivirus management solution. So you've got your endpoint protection on all your different devices, and they all use the web as a connectivity method. So this idea of being directly connected, it doesn't matter anymore. Those devices can be at home, they can be at the coffee shop, they can be in different office locations, and as long as they've got web connectivity, we can see those devices. We can ensure that they're operating securely.
So wait, wait. Sorry to interrupt you. This is very important here.
Yep.
You're saying I don't need to rely at all on the traditional perimeter corporate connectivity.
Well, in terms of direct,
with this.
I mean, we can talk about perimeter security and that kind of.
No. What I'm talking about direct. What you're saying is, so you're saying the agent now on my laptop now needs the internet. That's all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Very
and
useful.
If you're a CISO or one of the IT security team, you can log into that dashboard and you can see all of your estate, no matter where those devices are. So you've taken geography out of the equation. So that's obviously great from an endpoint management perspective. But what we've also done at Sophos is we've incorporated all the other products that we do as well into the same dashboard. So if you're looking for a solution to manage things like your mobile devices, if you're looking to manage encryption, if you want to manage your wireless access points, your firewalls, all those kind of things, they're all in the same dashboard. And again, you can see those devices from wherever they happen to be.
No, excellent. That's very, very useful. And I'm going to pick up on the encryption topic a little bit later, if you don't mind. And if I may now just go back to Ron, because I'm trying to complement, and I think there's a lot of synergy here, and that's really useful because for the listener, it's about how do they approach this challenge, right? So there's the challenge of visibility. And now coming back to Ron, you were talking about, so we need to know who is the user, but how are you achieving this with the data? How much data are you actually collecting to be able to do machine learning analysis on this particular issue of how do I know it's Amar who is at my door logging in?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I'm happy that you brought it up because everyone claims they do machine learning, and I'll tell you the truth, it's all about the data you have because you can have there's various algorithms, a lot of people working on these topics, but it all comes down really to the amount of data you can digest. So Silverfort is really focused on a specific type of data. And it can complement itself with additional external data feeds, again, like with Sophos or other data feeds. But the data that Silverfort looks at is actual authentication data. So each time when you try to communicate with a server, an application, via various protocols, you usually use one of the standard authentication protocols, and that's really where Silverfort is focused on. Understanding those authentication protocols. In some cases, they're even encrypted, but we really have a patent pending technology that allows us to understand those authentication protocols. And when I say understand, it means we know who the user is, where he's accessing from, and what resource he's trying to authenticate to. And that's how we can build a profile of the regular user activity and understand when he's doing something out of the ordinary. And that's extremely important. And digesting a lot of data, learning their behavior, and then understanding when something is out of the ordinary. Now, authentication is an enormous source of data, and we process a lot more than you would expect. Once you authenticate under single sign-on, you have a lot of additional authentication events. So we see anywhere between 200, 300 authentication events per user per day. So that's a lot to work with. But also, we work with other vendors like Sophos to ingest additional information. So I'll give you an example. If Sophos, with its visibility capabilities, can detect a certain endpoint, can detect command and control traffic from that server to the internet, we can then, based on that indication, which again, we're not a network monitoring tool, we do not have visibility to that kind of traffic, we can, based on that input, now enforce multi-factor authentication or block authentications from that server. Let's say for the next 48 hours, until we understand if that server indeed is infected or if we need to disable it, etc. So that's the idea now. And that's the important thing. If we go back to the fatigue around, we don't do machine learning and try to do risk-based authentication for the fun of it, but it really comes down to being an extremely effective method to bother the users less. So when you challenge a user when he authenticates to a service, it's never fun, right? He wanted to get to what he needs to do. Suddenly you tell him to check your phone for an additional authentication, or click this for an additional authentication. Any user would prefer not to have that.
Yes.
But if you could only do that, and you can also communicate this to the user, only do that kind of intrusion on his productivity when you believe that he's at risk.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, and
Sure.
This is kind of my job to help dig a little bit deeper.
Sure.
Now, as a CISO, I like that idea. It's brilliant, right? And it's amazing. We are talking of products working together. Okay, so Sophos detects something malicious on the endpoint. Its detection capabilities are very good. It now sends an alert to you. You pick it up. I guess the question is, how much confidence do I place in now? I have to now place my confidence in Silverfort to make sure that the user journey, number one, isn't interrupted, but also to make sure that it's interrupted at the right time. Am I making sense in my question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a few things here. There's a lot of methods. First of all, about the interruption method, which I think is important. When you detect a threat in your network, you have a few options. One is to detect an alert. The other is to remediate that actively. And there's a lot of different remediation methods, very aggressive ones, such as locking down the endpoint. That's one option. I would like to argue that prompting the user and kind of crowdsourcing your security is a very soft intervention method. If the user is who he claims to be, it'll slow him down a little bit, but he'll be able to continue his workflow with self-service. It's not like you lock down his endpoint. He needs to contact now the help center to get out of the situation. Now, on the other hand, if it's not the user, he'll be blocked pretty effectively. If it's a bot or malware, it'll be blocked effectively. So it is a soft type of intervention. That's the first thing. Secondly, when you intervene, I think that the great advantage about intervening and triggering a user action is we really kind of outsource our knowledge to the user. So when a user clicks, yes, this is me, we learn that. So we have a reinforcement learning mechanism that allows us to improve our algorithms based on the users. So if a user, I've been prompting him for MFA every morning when he does the same activity, He does it every time. Maybe I don't need to prompt him next time. Maybe I understand that's a regular profile. As long as he's doing that, we're all right. And that's
very useful. Very, very useful. If I may, Jonathan, if I may come to you now, and we were talking about encryption and management, right? And transparent security is not just for the end user; it also is for the administrator who now has to manage all of this remotely, right? And it's easy, but it's also challenging at the same time. So, what kind of control does the administrator have to be able to rapidly detect, things are starting to go wrong, and be more proactive? Am I making sense in my question? Because we're talking about proactivity with Silverfort, and so I think you also do something similar. But the administrator, how much proactivity can he bring into this with the visibility you offer?
Okay, so visibility into when things go wrong is probably best sort of spoken about in terms of our synchronized security story. So all of our endpoints will generate a security heartbeat, which basically indicates to the rest of the software system the health of that particular endpoint. If your device is healthy and everything's okay, then it will be green. But if we detect the signs of an infection, some kind of malware, for example, then the heartbeat status will change to red. And that's obviously going to flag up to the administrator in their dashboard to indicate that there's actually a problem with that device. But we also have introduced some elements of automation to this process as well. Okay. So even without administration intervention, if we get a red heartbeat, we can actually start to change our security response towards a particular device. So let's say one of our machines has some kind of infection, then if it's behind one of our firewalls, then the firewall could detect that and cut off access to critical resources, even cut off access to things like the internet, for example, which is a very good way of making sure that we don't leak data out to a successful cyber criminal. And even devices inside the same network that are not necessarily communicating via the firewall can also be told that that device over there has some kind of problem with it. You are not to communicate with it, and that will stop what is a very common cyber criminal technique of lateral movement. In other words, where we get one device infected, and then almost the first thing that most strains of modern ransomware do, for example, is they immediately start looking around the network and trying to find other victims. So using this idea of security heartbeat, we can recognize the device, it has a problem, we can pin it down, isolate it, and stop that infection from spreading. And then Software Central will go busy itself with the process of cleaning up that malware. And obviously, talking about productivity, once the device is fixed and it's remediated, the heartbeat status changes back to green automatically. And again, what that's doing is bringing that device back into productivity. So all the resources they would have access to before are then restored. But just where you've got that window where the device is potentially in a compromised state, then our system automatically pins it down and isolates it.
So it's again, for the listeners, just to kind of summarize, and it's amazing, this is good stuff. So what you're saying, Jonathan, is security orchestration. So you're automating orchestration, and can you semi-automate it? So can it, instead of automatically switching off the firewall, is it easy to configure the product to say, suggest this action, and then someone has to say yes? Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can kind of set the dial where you want to. Now, we always recommend that you automatically isolate a device purely and simply because time is critical in any kind of outbreak. But one of the common requests we get from customers, and yeah, we do absolutely support this, is you can set it up so that it doesn't automatically return, to normal use, and somebody has to go and investigate that. If you want to go a stage further and move out of straight endpoint protection and start looking at things like EDR technologies, then you can also go through the entire threat chain and find out, where the malware came from, what it's touched, what files it's altered, and you can look across the rest of the estate as well. So using, again, the EDR platform, you can see, well, has anybody else been to the same website? Has anybody else done the same download? Because
all of this from the same dashboard?
All of this from the same dashboard, yeah, absolutely.
And without interrupting the user. I mean, if they've got a malware, that's obviously you got to interrupt them. But if I wanted to do my investigations and get my team to look at, go and tell me what's the scale of the problem, are you saying I don't have to necessarily get them involved until the last minute?
Not at all. Not at all. You're absolutely Right, yeah. So all of the endpoints, they feed their sort of usage data and their activity into Sophos Central. So the IT security team that are looking into the investigations, they're really actually perusing the data that's inside Sophos Central. They're not actually sort of directly looking at the endpoint itself. So as long as the user is in a safe state, then they're welcome to carry on being productive, and the forensics can kind of happen in the background from the user's point of view. And again, this all comes back to keeping the user productive whilst maintaining the security.
Okay, that's actually quite useful. Ron, if I may come to you. Actually, sorry, well, just 1 second. There's a question, Jonathan, so maybe we ask it right now. So does your Sophos Central, did you call it? The one
That's right, yes.
Is that what it's called? Sophos Central?
Yep.
So does that work with other AV products, example, or malware products, or is it only Sophos?
Okay, it's a very good question. So it kind of depends on which other products it is that you're talking about. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you're aware, Amar, there's not really an interoperability.
No, there isn't. Sadly, yep.
Sadly not. So yes, of course, Sophos products work with other Sophos products as well, but we've also exposed a lot of APIs in our product.
Right.
So, we are, more than happy and we are actively building bridgeheads that would allow us to communicate with other vendors and other solutions.
Yes.
But it kind of depends on their platforms and how much they want to accept data backwards and forwards. But, for example, we've already used our API successfully to integrate with products from the likes of Microsoft, for example. So, we don't necessarily want to be completely proprietary. We accept that there are other products out there, and if we can work with them, then we want to facilitate that.
Excellent. And as Ron was saying, I mean, you could work with them also, I guess. It works well. Ron, if I may come to you now, on the question of you claim, and again, I'm not challenging that. I'm asking how agentless, proxyless. Those are the two things. I won't talk about limitless, but how. Can you explain a little bit more, agentless and proxyless? So how are you solving this problem if there is no need to install an agent?
Yeah, so we saw a few, when we looked at the problem in the industry, what we see is really that companies aren't deploying MFA widely enough. They really, they stick to let's say the VPN, maybe they have Office 365 covered, but that's really not enough to stop an attack. Many companies are at that state. And we try to understand why. What's the barrier? MFA technology isn't new, but the existing solutions, if you look at all the legacy MFA solutions, they really require you or to implement some kind of agent on servers and on desktops. And another option maybe is to alter the application. So if it's to a web application, which a lot of companies are focused only on web applications, we do all, it really requires you to change the application in some cases to implement the MFA vendor's SDK or API calls. And for large companies, that really isn't practical, especially that when they have thousands of applications and tens of thousands of servers and hundreds of thousands of servers, they cannot deploy agents or alter applications. That's just the problem.
Yeah.
And our approach here, and sorry for the long intro, but our approach here is really to focus on the identity store, because you can write a lot of different products, right? There's so many different products, but when you come to the authentication part, you're probably not going to implement your own authentication protocol. And that comes down to certain standards and common identity stores. So a large percentage of identity stores, when I'm talking about Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, Okta, Ping, for the web SSO stores, etc., Linux directories, there are quite a few, but the popular ones there's just a handful of very popular identity stores, which we see as the go-to identity stores with our customers. So our solution approach is really to integrate at the identity store level. Mm-hmm. And we do that in different identity stores with different methods. But in general, we enable features on those directories in order to pass the authentication request to Silverfort for a second opinion. So we let the identity store handle the first factor, okay? But we are then another gatekeeper that can trigger block that certain authentication based on risk, or or trigger multi-factor authentication, or most of the time just let the authentication pass through, but add that layer of visibility.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, very good. Okay, so a question has come up specifically for you in this case. What additional authentication methods are suggested? And obviously, given the current situation, we don't want to interrupt them, right? Because that's the key thing here. So the key theme of this topic, just to remind everyone, is how do we make everyone still carrying on doing what they want to, but we don't want to interrupt them. But we also earlier talked about, Ron, you were talking, and Jonathan, we were saying if something bad does happen, then that needs to be controlled, obviously. But the specific question here, Ron, is any additional authentication methods are suggested whilst trying not to obstruct the employee? Where is, how and where? Brief answer.
Yeah, so just briefly, really, I believe that, again, you want to have a wide approach covering many applications, but in order not to obstruct the employee, you have to implement a risk-based approach. So obviously, when your admin is accessing a privileged server or your PAM solution, you want always to have MFA in place. But when someone is accessing a productivity app, or your accountant is accessing a shared folder, you don't want him to have be challenged all the time, because that harms productivity. And that's why you have to take it with a risk-based approach, and you have to really treat every population, every user population, and every resource population with the relevant risk level. So I mean, it's really a trade-off between risk and productivity. So if there is a very high-profile user with a high-profile server or application he's accessing, you should definitely interrupt him more. But if it's a lower-profile user, business users, you definitely want to use a risk-based authentication platform.
Excellent. And then I guess you could, again, taking that risk-based approach, when you are configuring a product like this, you could say, generate a high alert if something like this happens. So instead of necessarily introducing that particular interruption, you could pass it to an analyst for review.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. So, I mean, even for me, I always think about, the block, the MFA, the more aggressive things. But in many cases, again, like Jonathan mentioned, it's all about the visibility. So if you can notify the admin, you have a service account here that is usually authenticating in a specific profile, suddenly did something new, check it out. That's a lot of times key, and not necessarily shutting it down or blocking it.
One other question on very quickly, Ron, on the AI or ML, you said the data. How long does it take before the ML starts to kick in? Am I making sense in my question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very briefly, yeah.
Absolutely. So every ML platform really has a learning curve.
Correct.
So there's certain profiles that we built into the system that actually don't require machine learning. They're very deterministic policies that like profiles when we detect a brute force attack, it's not something that we need to learn in your network. When it looks like you have ransomware in play, again, there's nothing, we don't want to learn that in the environment. So those are ready day one when you install the product, those profiles, but the actual adaptive user-based profiles take some time, and it actually varies based on the type of profile. So sorry for giving like a longer answer here.
No, that's fine.
But if we're trying to profile the hours of the day which the user authenticates in, that is something that over a week or so, you could fairly do a decent profile.
Decent job, yes.
Great.
And you said something earlier, which I remember, 200 different types of authentications, did you say, per user per day?
Yeah, that's like an average, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
And the user doesn't notice these authentications, right? We're all working under single sign-on, having
Correct.
a good experience, but we monitor them.
You monitor all of them. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. And you're using that to build your telemetry, which brings me to Jonathan. You guys are generating, if someone has, Jonathan, all your products, right? Mm-hmm. The amount of telemetry and data you're generating. how is that being actioned? Am I making sense in my question? Because that's a significant amount of data that is being generated from all your different endpoint, the ADR, AV. How is that getting back into this visibility angle?
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
So volume of data and presentation of data is kind of our problem, really. Software Central, in conjunction with things like the endpoint, will work out what is, in inverted commas, I guess, potentially interesting. So it will filter out kind of automatically the background noise, the day-to-day stuff, and just send to Software Central anything which looks like it, has an element of interest to it. And then the dashboards themselves are also then tuned to only really flag up the stuff that's really useful to the admin. What we try to do with our EDR product is to avoid what what a lot of other people have done in this field, and almost create something that has so much noise in it that it becomes unusable. Our experience, or our customers' experience of moving from other vendors has been that they've invested in technologies like EDR, and what they've actually found is that it very rapidly becomes shelfware, because there's just so much information there that it's very difficult to understand what's actually valuable. So we try and distill the noise down to just really flag up the stuff that's important, and allow the admin then to look at it. And we always try to build our products with a view that not necessarily all of our consumers are going to be IT security specialists. You would much rather create a dashboard that allows a generalist to make a very smart decision on this sort of stuff. So that's why we kind of break it down to make it as straightforward as it possibly can be for them.
Excellent.
And a lot of that is done through things like visualization. So instead of just giving you lines of text, we have like a flow diagram that effectively says, the threat came in from here, it did this, and this, almost like a flow diagram. And then you can go into that and explore in more detail. But it's the kind of thing that you could put in front of a generalist, and they would be able to comprehend it.
Excellent. And this is what I like, because making it easy to use is very critical. At the same time, I think what even Silverford you are doing is taking a lot of the pain and doing the ML AI analysis so that the analyst can make better informed decisions. There's a question. So the average company, as we all know, has so many endpoints, and because everyone's working from home, I think the endpoints are very likely increasing. How should you go about keeping track of all these endpoints and making sure they, as in the endpoints, are configured right, running the latest software, etc.? Open question. Whoever wants to take it first can answer that. Up to you.
Probably one for me, I suspect. So it's just a case of creating generalized policies to say, this is my security standard, and all of my devices have to comply to this set of policies, this set of rules. And because of the way Software Central works, it's going to communicate that out to all of the endpoints, and they all pick up the same policies, and they all sort of subscribe to it. And if you make a change, as often people do, then again, that change is communicated out to those endpoints so that they can respond accordingly and start to shift their security stance, really.
Okay, that's a good answer. So, Ron, are you looking at, for those who have done crypto trading, even if you change your browser or if you upgrade your browser, supposedly adaptive, authentication kicks in and starts challenging you, right? So my question is, are you looking at, what are you considering into your telemetry to make these kind of decisions where you're going to go, hold on, something really weird has happened, so I need to maybe present a 2FA. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So we take in a variety of things. So I think the classic approach really focuses on, you logged in from a new computer, a new browser. That's all right. But we have the privilege of really seeing through your whole authentication pattern. So we see the device you're accessing from, and we're able to see what resources you are reaching. We can also pull information from your directories. So we can see that you are part of the enterprise admin group, or you have your part, or perhaps there is a shadow admin at play, which for whoever doesn't know the term, it's a stealthy administrator, which isn't part of the domain admin group, but practically has permissions or has a way to reset a domain admin password. There's a lot of different methods, and effectively be a domain admin. So if we identify all kinds of different risk parameters, we can treat them accordingly. So if there's a shadow admin that has power over your administrative account, you're at high risk before you did anything, right? So we look at a lot of different parameters, and there's a really long list of things that.
No, I understand. Yeah, but so you're also looking at this question in terms of if someone introducing new devices, also you are starting to pick up those kind of patterns.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent. This is very good.
And another thing that we also try to assume, again, on the device side, our offering really isn't around the endpoint, specific endpoint management, but we do assume that devices get compromised, right? At the end of the day, you have a big enough an organization, a single device will get compromised, and really the question is what happens after that point, right? So are you able to detect the lateral movement patterns? Are you able to block classic identity-based techniques like pass the hash, which is very common, etc.? How are you able to detect the ransomware spreading out and mounting shared drives? So again, we live under the assumption that the endpoint will be compromised, and what can we do after the first endpoint is compromised?
Excellent. Okay, one question is not relevant. So another question, and this is, I guess, for both of you, and anyone can take it. Given the remote working kind of reality, and we're talking about productivity, right? Do you see adaptive security becoming the norm? And how is it going to? Is it actually going to? Because I'm taking a slightly. I'm a very pragmatic person, but sometimes trusting technology too much can be a big of a problem, right? Because I'm sure and our first webinar we had was about resident criminals, right? Those who become permanent, right? Permanent residents in your digital network, because they are going to try their best to become the norm. Am I making sense to both of you, right? So the question is, if we trust only AI and pattern behavior, surely the criminals also know this already. So I think that would be the last question for today, and then we'll take some closing comments. Ron, if you go first, and then Jonathan, over to you. The question, just to quickly summarize: criminals are not stupid either, or the smart ones, dare I say. They know what you guys are doing, the cool stuff in terms of pattern matching and behavior and AI. So if they figure out how you are doing this, then they become hidden. What are you doing to avoid that?
So just I'll try to answer briefly. There's two pieces to this. One is making sure that you have high hygiene around your various privileged users. That means admins of sorts, and make sure that any change to those is noticed and alerted upon. So that's one piece, constantly monitoring and making sure that you have a network and, I would say, identity hygiene. That's one piece. The second piece is really, I believe that when an attacker gains his first foothold in the HR department with a CV file that was sent, again, his end goal is to dominate the network. It's not only to get access to the HR mailbox, right? It's usually about getting a larger foothold, and that's where we catch them, right? So at least our approach really is that attackers are ambitious, and once they try to move laterally, that's when we would like to intercept them and detect them.
Okay, fine. That's a fair enough question. Fair enough answer. Jonathan, over to you, sir. What are you guys doing? Because obviously you've been around for much longer. You have a lot of historical context, but surely the criminals are not resting either, are they? So what does Sophos do to stay ahead? It's not an easy task.
No, indeed it's not, and we do not believe in AI as a silver bullet which solves every single problem. What artificial intelligence gives us is the ability to, as you rightly point out, look back at the knowledge that we already have. So the many millions of malware samples that we have on record, and learning about their characteristics. learning years, and then allowing the endpoints to make an intelligent guess about what is likely to be malware based on those characteristics. But if you look at our sort of top tier of endpoint protection, which is our managed threat response service, then that doesn't exclusively rely on AI. What you're buying with that product is also a team of human beings that will actually look at your network and spot these patterns and these trends. Because AI is, it's very good at solving the broader problem, but it doesn't always apply things like business context. It doesn't always necessarily understand exactly what all these transactions actually are and recognize meaningful patterns inside them. So we very much believe in a kind of hybrid approach of yes, AI can deal with the volume, AI can deal with the day-to-day and the maybe even the 99% of attacks, but there's still very much a place for the human practitioner in all of this, and that can be either an experienced person using our EDR platform to do threat hunting in their own network, or it can be somebody in our security operations center providing our managed threat response service. And again, in either case, it's applying that logic and leap of logic that really only human beings can do to really weed out what the bad guys are up to. Having said that, there are certain inalienable things that criminals will always do that we can recognize.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. We are 45 minutes into this. A couple of pointers and reminders, audience. If you do have any questions, call to cloud as you see it there with .co.uk. You can go on their website. You can reach out to call to cloud and ask any particular specifics about the product and the products. And the other thing to remind you is there are downloads in this and all other webinars. So once you look at the webinar, you can actually go into the download section that you see on your screen and download any collateral now and even after the webinar. So keep checking back because sometimes data is uploaded after the webinar finishes. And there's actually an offer which we are giving, Cyber Management Alliance is giving, on our incident planning and response training. That details are also in the download section. You get about 10% off of the online and other training. Okay, Jonathan, I'll start with you first. Take a minute and summarize what, if anything, that any best practice, any final comments that people should do to make sure they still stay secure, but also kind of don't interrupt the home users' work-life balance.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, first and foremost, do the basics. All right, make sure that you've got your devices up to date, they're patched successfully, and then run the latest OS and the latest software that you're using. Minimize the amount of software that you allow people to install. If you can use some kind of application control, just use the stuff that is needed for your business. Use some kind of cloud-based technology to manage your endpoint protection. Think about if they've got facilities to do things like web content filtering as well. And then, yeah, maybe look at a security solution like Sophos, obviously, that has that ability to coordinate defenses together, because, as IT teams get stretched and inevitably, I guess, budgets are going to shrink, then all those automation capabilities will really pay dividends. It'll keep you secure whilst minimizing the amount of time and money you need to plow into security.
Okay.
Yeah, and
I know we can go on, but yeah, I think that's really useful, yeah. Jonathan. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Train your users, use something to teach them what is phishing, because we see so much more phishing, and treat your users like your allies, not your enemies, because if you can get them on side, they'll do a lot to help you with security.
Excellent. Okay, Ron, you have the final. I will obviously offer a final closing comment, but other than that, over to you, sir. Ron? Oh no.
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
Absolutely, agree with Jonathan's message on, you have to nail down the basics, and there's no silver bullet. So, from the Silverfort side, at least what we believe in is really adding that layer of visibility and being able to validate your users are who they say they are, who they claim they are, becomes extremely critical at these times. And just remember, you don't really have a choice. Productivity is, if the company wants to survive, and risk-based authentication, we believe, is a way to enable a lot of productivity with security when it's needed at the right time. So that's what we believe in, but it's really needs to be part of your whole suite of solutions and work together with other security products.
Okay, I want to thank the panelists, Jonathan and Ron, and everybody listening in. Thank you for the time. Like I said, the downloads, and remember to look at the recording. There are always nuggets of gold nuggets you can get. And thank you for all your time, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.